So let's talk a little more about classes. On the left here we can see the definition that we've made, in which means we've defined a member named A of type animal and assigned it with a new instance of animal. Okay, now in that definition, in the new animal, we are including parens, which are signifying our call to a method. Whenever we call a method, we are using parens. So what method are we calling here? Well, when you're defining a new instance of a class, you are calling a special method called the constructor. Okay? If we didn't define any constructors, then an automatic one will get created for us. Let's define a constructor for animal and use it. So we'll say here public animal, and this is our constructor. A constructor is a special type method. It doesn't have a return type, and its name is the same name as the name of the class that we're using. That's what makes this method special. That's what makes it the constructor. Now in the constructor we can set all sorts of defaults for this class. For example, for the same we can say name, no name was given, and that will be the default for our name. Okay, and the same we can say for type, animal type, no type was given. Great. So now if we'll define C and ask C to describe itself, we will see that Rex is a dog and Kitty is a cat, but no name was given is no type was given. Great. And then we can remember to give it that. So we can say c.name equals Snoopy and c.animal type is a dog. And when we run it right now, we'll get to see that the defaults were overridden by the settings that we've set. Perfect. Now let's say that we want any animal in our memory or database to have a unique identifier, an ID. So let's add one over here. Public int ID. Great. Now we need somewhere to store all the IDs that we've given, or pretty much to store the last used ID. Okay? And this is where static comes to help us. Let's define a new member. Int static int, okay, last used ID. Okay. Now, whenever we run the constructor of an animal, we want to set our ID. So we can say that last used ID plus plus, which means we are adding 1 to the last used ID, and we'll set our ID according to it. Now, if we'll ask the describe yourself method to add a bit more information, like and its ID is plus ID, we will see now that every animal will have a unique identifier. Rex is a dog and its ID is 1, Kitty is a cat and its ID is 2, and no name was given and no name is 3, which somehow I should move describe yourself to be after it. Cool. So let's run it again. Rex is a dog, Kitty is a cat and its ID is 2, and Snoopy is a dog and its ID is 3. So we can see that the static field is shared among all the instances of that class. Okay, it's a static field shared across all the instances of that class. So we can see that whenever we are creating a new animal, okay, the last ID is incremented and the value is set to the ID member. Perfect. Now one last thing we want to have with ID. One of the developers can by mistake do something like this. c.id is equal to 9. But we don't want to allow our developers to change the ID. Well, the way to make a variable unchangeable is to define that variable as read-only. And read-only means, by adding the read-only keyword here at the definition of that field, we can actually make sure that C# watches over us and doesn't allow us to change that value after the constructor. So it can only be changed within the constructor. So we can say C.id here is no longer legal, and we'll get an error that we read-only field cannot be assigned to, except in a constructor or a variable initializer. So we need to delete this line over here, and this is how the code protects us from making mistakes. So let's recap what we've done over here. We defined the special method, the constructor, which is run whenever a new instance is created. We've defined an ID using a static of last used IDs. A static field is shared across all the instances of animal, and that way we could progress it and it was visible to all instances of animal, and we've set it to our ID field, which we've then made read-only to make sure that no one else touches it. One more thing, you may have noticed that we didn't say public over here. That's because no one outside this class should see it. And if you remember in previous video, we mentioned that private is the default for members. So if I try to say here animal dot, I will not see the ID. If I try to do a dot, I will not see the last known ID because that is a private field.